Well, hey there. How you doing today? Simeon with you again. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. So I wanted to talk a little today about what's going on with so-called UFO, UAP disclosure, and this idea that, there is no way that any of this could be kind of a terrestrial technology. And this is what I mean by this. If you've noticed, ever since the New York Times broke the ATIP UFO disclosure article in December of 2017, we're told that, the media and the military have slowly embarked on this process of disclosure. Disclosure. What does disclosure mean? It means disclosing truths that have been hidden, ideas and evidence and facts and historical circumstances that might not have seen the light of day until now. And if you look at the headlines recently, it appears that there is this disclosure going on about the subject. Well, so far, I'm not buying it. I don't really see any evidence of UFO disclosure. There is some talk about what is now being called UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, but I think this linguistic shift to calling them UAPs, it reminds me a little bit of Orwellian newspeak, which is that you can rewrite history and what's going on in people's minds by changing the language that you're using. And this is very reminiscent to me, this whole scenario that we're seeing play out now, of what happened with cold fusion in the late 1980s. If you remember Fleischmann and Pons, we've done videos about this before, claimed to have discovered an anomalous energetic process which they said was cold fusion as opposed to, hot fusion, a fusion, nuclear fusion process that takes place in stars and our sun and so forth, the way it's explained. And curiously, there were no other labs that could replicate their findings, and cold fusion, as you're well aware, officially was relegated to the junk heap of scientific ideas. It was called junk science. It was called pathological science. And curiously enough, neither MIT nor any of these other labs claimed that they could reproduce this palladium deuterium effect, with Fleischmann and Pons said was creating anomalous bursts of heat that were well beyond what we would expect from a chemical reaction. Therefore, it had to be a nuclear reaction. And then there was more research done, and there was a presidential panel, if you'll remember, under the first President Bush, the younger Bush. And the New York Times had an article. They said there was no evidence for cold fusion. Fleischmann and Pons eventually lost their jobs at the University of Utah. They went to different places. I think Pons went to France, and Fleischmann, they went to work for Toyota, which spent about $40 million on this research. But curiously enough, there were labs that were studying this all the time. And I'll put up on the screen for you here the latest in this. This is a patent from the U.S. Navy for cold fusion in 2019. And it looks like it was approved by the Patent Office attorneys in March of 2021, this year. Now, don't you find that a little strange? Is that at one level, publicly, we're told that there was no evidence for this process. And yet, at the same time, you find that the U.S. Navy has applied for a patent in this very same process. However, they are not calling it cold fusion anymore. What do they call it? LENR, low energy nuclear reaction. And perhaps that is a better name for it. There was no evidence at the time that this actually was a cold fusion process, hydrogen atoms fusing into helium and so forth. So perhaps another name for it is better. But here's my point, is once you rename something, now it's something that is legitimate. You can study it again. Unfortunately, the people that rename these ideas never seem to want to go back to the founders of these processes to give them credit where credit is due, as one of my uncles used to say. So the problem with this is this cold fusion area studied with Nikola Tesla. It was further studied and publicized in the New York Times from a researcher named Winston Bostic, who was from Princeton University. He was someone connected with the H-bomb program of how to use nuclear power to create something beneficial for humankind, non-polluting, renewable energy source. And they were looking at ways of turning fusion into fusion energy. And Winston Bostic created what he called galaxies in the test tube, these vortex-like structures at a, microscopic level. And later on, there was John Hutchinson, who reproduced the results of Tesla micro ball lightning with his fractured metal samples. And then Kenneth Shoulders was asked to investigate the work of John Hutchinson. He publishes his paper in 1987, EV, A Tale of Discovery, what he called charge clusters, what we now called EVOs, exotic vacuum objects. And further, this work was also done later by Takeaki Matsumoto in Japan, and a number of Japanese researchers, a number of Russian researchers have all been working on this. And so what's going on here with this Navy patent is essentially they want to own this technology, which other people have been working on for over a century. I'm sorry. It's sort of like patenting vacuum, the process of vacuums and vacuum cleaners. Vacuum cleaners have been around too long. You can't patent the vacuum cleaner anymore. Okay? So what we're seeing here, I believe, with the UFO issue is sort of the same thing. Is you first want to rename it. You spend 70 years saying it's ice crystals and swamp gas and flocks of geese and misidentifications of the planet Venus and God knows how many other ridiculous explanations. You intimidate witnesses, create disinformation programs, only to turn around now and say, we actually should take a look at this, but it's not the same thing, so we're going to distance ourselves from the original topic. And there's only one problem with it, with doing that. It's this. What about all these other researchers and people that have been looking at this topic for going back decades and decades, all the way back to the attack on Los Angeles in February 1942. You remember that picture of that object, and they're shooting the howitzers at it early in World War II. They weren't sure what it was, but the thing never fell down after thousands and thousands of shots being fired and hitting it. So in any case, what I'm seeing here is a very clever attempt to redefine the issue away from the historical basis. I don't think that's a good idea. You need to include history. You can't study anything without knowing where it came from. Any subject you want, just name it. There's other people that have studied it before, because there's nothing really new under the sun. We're just rediscovering what exists. And if you want to just say this is only since the Nimitz incident of 2004, and those are UAPs, that makes me a little suspicious. Now, just like cold fusion has been around, you could call it LENR, you can call it charge clusters. There's another name for it now called coherent matter waves. And here's another patent that you might find interesting. Lockheed Martin filed a patent for coherent matter waves in 2011. And This is exactly what Kenneth Shoulders was looking at, John Hutchinson, Nikola Tesla, and many others. It's the exact same process. They even use some of the same language that Kenneth Shoulders used in his discussion of this subject. We're talking about creating clusters of electrons that are coherent, where the particles kind of assume the same frequency and temperature and become one big particle, which can often appear as ball lightning, which maybe you've read about, seen, or know something about. This is all the same phenomena. So I think being told that UAPs could not possibly be our own technology is just like saying cold fusion didn't exist before the Navy filed a patent in it in 2019. This is what's going on here. I'm not saying for sure, folks, who or exactly created these Tic Tacs and these other objects we've seen around the Navy that seems to have really engrossed the press recently. And they're now saying, oh my God, UFOs are real. But just in the same way that cold fusion existed before the Navy patent, it's pretty clear these objects have been around. Many people have been researching them and trying to understand. It's much, much deeper than just objects that can be annoying to naval pilots or cause them to scramble their F-18s and so forth off carrier groups. This has affected people. We've interviewed people on the channel. I've interviewed them for Black Swan Ghost. This goes back a long way. So and we're going to be talking about this more in upcoming videos. I just think we should be very cautious about what's going on here. And I'm not saying I have all the answers. I just feel that our attention is being attempted to be redirected into a different direction with new language and new terminology. And to me, that is not disclosure. Disclosure is when you look at the entire topic with all the evidence, going back to the airships of the 1890s, which we're seeing all over the United States and I'm sure in other countries too. When you look at all the evidence, that's disclosure. And I'm not against these. We've interviewed the people that were involved in the Nimitz incidents, the crew, the Princeton, and the Nimitz radar tech guys. We've had them here on the channel. It's fascinating stuff. But keep in mind, we are not looking at things microscopically. We want the whole picture. And until we get the whole picture, for me, it's not disclosure. Now, I have to say thanks to Bob Grenier at the Martin Fleisch Memorial Project. You should look at his channel on YouTube to see the latest that's going on in this Leonard research. But it's very clear from researchers like Bob Grenier that we're simply rediscovering the same thing over and over again because the powers that be have not wanted to recognize Leonard. I mean, obviously there's certain companies and institutions that don't want renewable, inexpensive, non-polluting energy, and this is what we're talking about. So it seems for decade after decade, people discover it, then it's forgotten and discovered it. Oh, and now all of a sudden, we can get a patent in it. It's real. We should be very cautious of that. We should insist that the credit go back to the real inventors of these processes and the real researchers in this UFO field. So many we've featured on the show, talked about, because those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. I forget who said that, but that's what could happen here. We want to have the complete story, the complete picture. Phoenix Lights, 1997, Hudson Valley UFO triangles in the 70s and 80s. We've had those people on the YouTube channel. The Belgium UFOs of the 80s. Where are those? Okay. We have to include all of those types of encounters, plus so many more, going back all the way to Kenneth Arnold and before. Okay, I think you know what I'm talking about. So anyway, happy to hear your comments in the box below. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you soon. Take care for now, and bye.